Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Tuesday, August the 12th, and we get this opportunity to spend the morning together. So I trust you're waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. Today is Tuesday, August the 12th, and we are continuing in a study that we began at the beginning of this year called Show and Tell. An opportunity to take a look at how Jesus has been revealing himself to the world around us and calls us into that same work, to be this light that shines right in the midst of darkness, and to be this salt that is preserving the world from further decay until he comes back. It's a privilege to serve this way, and it gives us a sense of purpose and meaning to our life each and every day. And so along that line, I'd like to pick up on another aspect of this show and tell, and that was taking a look at faith as the defining, attribute of a Christian. This idea of this faith that we're putting into our relationship with the Lord. And so I'd like to take a look here at Hebrews chapter 11, and just begin again by reiterating a couple of verses that we looked at here in the opening chapter. The call to them at the end of chapter 10 is that they would not throw away their confidence, that they needed to persevere, so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. And it says this at the end of chapter 10, it says, "For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved." And so here is this passage now that we get an opportunity to take a look at and recognize that this whole idea of persevering is because we have been privileged to have this message that is all consuming, that gives us a framework by which to look out upon one's life. And so here in Hebrews 11:1, it's one of the most beautiful statements you'll read regarding faith. It says, "Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." So we hope for something, which means that we're not in full possession of it, and we don't see it. So it's with eyes of faith that we see this. But that there are many things that we do that. You go to college, right, with the idea that you're going to graduate. So you haven't graduated yet. You're not in possession of that degree, but you get up and you do your work every day, right? You put in the time, you put in the studies, because you have this sense that this is on the horizon, right? You go on diets because it's the intention, right, that I'm going to lose some weight, that I'm going to get in better shape. There's 1,001 things that we do where we are sure of what we're hoping for, and we are certain of what we do not see. And this is the same attitude that we are to bring to one's faith, recognizing that the Lord has opened up these doors of opportunity for you and for me, that he has given us his word, and he's trustworthy. The whole Bible is filled with that, right? Of stories about how God has not only given a prophetic word of what is yet to come, but then also backs it up and shows himself to his people, and has given them a way in which they are to live out their lives so that they might sense God's presence. So it begins then with this glorious statement, right, about how by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was made not out of what was visible. So, in other words, God is the first cause of everything around us. So why would I doubt? Why when he has given us a sure word, why would I look at that in any other way than this manner in which God is showing this to me? So from there, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things here. we looked at this definition of faith and saw that it brings in not only an inward confidence, but faith also has this outward actuality to it, right? That we're sure of something. Faith, is going to be seen in the way in which we are living out our life. People can see it, and they can recognize the hope that is within us. But here's another thought that I want to bring to your attention today. Faith provides the ability to perceive what the eye cannot see, right? This is what this definition is. Says faith is, is being sure of what we hope for, and being convinced, right, of what we haven't seen. So faith is providing us with the ability to perceive what the eye cannot. So armed with a working definition of faith, we're now offered some examples of what this faith looked like among ordinary people. And we're treated to an example of men and women who took their faith seriously, and they stayed the course. They were not perfect. They were all flawed, and yet they held on to God's promises. And so the passage now, if we're looking at Hebrews chapter 11, if you look on verse 4, I'd just like to take you through a couple of these examples this week that would again just reiterate what we looked at this past Sunday, but also it has a way of just reminding us again that those who have gone before us, there is this great cloud of witnesses that have demonstrated a faithfulness, at various times in this world's history, but especially in times of great darkness and challenge. We no sooner than we were told that God is the one who is the first cause, right, who made all things, that we are brought to the first children, right, Abel, Cain and Abel. It says here in verse 4, by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks, even though he is dead. We can't forget that Abel's blood reached the ear of God and called out for vengeance, right? This story, right? That they both bring this offering before God as a what was to be, really a declaration of their heart and their devotion to the one who had created everything that was before them. They didn't have the experience that their father and mother did, right? Adam and Eve were born into a garden that was, filled with perfection. The creation itself was in harmony. God had given them a simple command, and yet in violation of that command, they lost paradise. And the result of that story, right, is that sin enters into the world. And we see it beginning to have its effect in the jealousy that begins between Cain and Abel. God is pleased with Abel because he is walking in his way. Notice here, he didn't earn God's love, but it says that by faith, he was commended as a righteous man because of the way in which he believed in God and demonstrated that by his actions. Later on, aren't we going to read the same thing of Abraham? There was no law. There was no like earning your way into heaven. It was a demonstration of your heart. And he believed God. And so he drew near. Seems to be that Cain may have offered up his offering, but not with the same devotion. And when Abel's was accepted, God did say to Cain, listen, Cain, will I not accept you? You just got to check your heart, man. You need to do a little soul searching here. And then he warned him. If you go back and read in Genesis, right, God warns him and says, listen, sin is crouching at your door. Don't let it master you. So he's given him all these opportunities, but instead, in this fit of jealousy and rage, he winds up killing his own brother. I mean, it's not even a generation away from being in this garden of paradise, and you could already see how sin is beginning to affect, all of humanity. And so we can't forget that Abel's blood cried out to God. But I want you to also remember that in the same way, Jesus's blood cries out too. Only the blood of Christ, it says, will wash us from our sin. That the blood of Jesus is the one that not is only calling out for God to intervene and bring justice, but God's blood is also a blood that washes and cleanses us from all sin. It's what his name implied, right? It says when he was born, he was given the name Jesus because he would save his people from their sins. This is exactly what we find now, taking place in this passage. So let's go on to the next, to the verse 5. It says, by faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. Isn't that interesting? So here you have Enoch as one of the first persons who, it appears, was, taken from this world and directly into heaven. And we read of, obviously the resurrection of Jesus, but there are not too many people like this that you read about in the Bible. But for some reason, it says he didn't experience, found that he could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. So again, this sense of pleasing God was more in the condition of a person's heart than all of their actions, because none of us are going to be perfect. Since the day of the fall, we all have inherited this nature and this human nature that puts us at odds sometimes with God's will. But God also knows your heart. One of my favorite passages is a book that's found in the book of Chronicles, where there's this description being given of David, and it says, David was a man after God's own heart, except for Uriah the prophet. In other words, that whole episode of David committing adultery with Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, and the consequent the actions that he took to cover his tracks, right, that brought about Uriah's death, all of that, it wasn't brushed under the rug. God was fully aware of that. But even with that sin, there was enough about David's life that God was pleased with David and said David was one after my own heart. So we're not looking at perfection in this chapter, but we are finding that the condition of the heart is ones that people, they're not satisfied, right? They are continually working on their relationship with him. And then notice what it says in verse 6. It's almost as a testimony to what has just been said, that without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. See, Enoch lived to please God, and he received his reward. Enoch lives. And that's, isn't that part of the message here? Think about it. If I really don't believe that God exists, then it's going to be seen in the way in which I treat the world, the way I look at myself, right? Even these promises that are yet to come, they're like rubbish. Like, why do I even bother? If I don't believe that God someday is the one who's going to hold us all to account, then I live my life the way I feel like it. Whatever comes, comes. But something happens when all of a sudden you allow God's truth, right? His revelation about who he is, about the world in which we live in. You begin to think about all of those promises, what God says he's going to hold this world accountable to, that this path that he calls his children to walk on, so that we would love him with all of your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If this is the criteria, then you begin to recognize at the end of my life, I'm going to stand before this holy God and give an account for how I've lived out my life. You know, there's this great passage that's found in Matthew 25. This might be a good place just to bring this up, you know, in the context of looking at all these who believed God. There is this great passage in Matthew chapter 25 that we know as the sheep and the goats. It speaks about the end of the day, end of the age, when we will all stand before God and give an account for this life. Notice what it says here in verse 31 of Matthew chapter 25. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, right? So there is this promise of this return. Jesus' first coming was to give his life a ransom for the sins of men. But he is coming back. And when he comes back, it's going to be to judge the world, to bring about all of the changes that he had promised. New creation, right? New heavens, new earth, new bodies. So he says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Do you notice that when he says, come, you know, you who are blessed by my Father, receive this inheritance, is because they have been demonstrating a heart that was walking in concert with God's will and his purpose. And of all the things that he could talk about, you know, good theology, right? Or, you know, how much money you gave, you know, and like the criteria here is a simple one. Did you take care of your neighbor? When you saw him in distress, did you come alongside? Did you help? Did you love them as you would love yourself? And notice how they answered. They said, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you? In other words, they're not denying that they did these things, but they didn't recognize that when they were doing it to the least of these, they were doing it for him, right? Which is what Jesus says. He says, listen, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. So my walk with God is seen in the way in which I am treating my neighbor. If any man says that he loves God, but he doesn't love his brother, it says you're a liar. The truth is not in you. That's what it says in 1 John, for instance. You can read it for yourself. It in the very first chapter, it tells you that. It says, if you say that you love God, but you don't love your brother, it says, how, in fact, it goes on to say, how can you say that you love God whom you have not seen, if you don't love your brother whom you have seen? See, because our faith then is a faith that is saying, my spiritual walk with God is also going to be seen in the way in which I live out my life. So all of your spirituality, if it doesn't result in you loving your neighbor as yourself, then maybe you don't love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength as you think you do. And that's what this chapter is all about. Not only chapter 25, but also Hebrews chapter 11. Let's go on and look when it says, then the Lord is going to turn to those who are on his left, the goats, right? And instead of welcoming them into this kingdom that was prepared for them, he says, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So judgment is coming on the wicked and the evil. This adversary of humanity will one day be bound forever. We won't have to contend with the brokenness that's in this world when Jesus comes back again. But notice when that day comes, he says, notice the charges brought against him in verse 42. He says, I was hungry and you gave me nothing. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. I needed clothes, you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you didn't look after me. And they answered the same way that the others did. They said, Lord, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, stranger, needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and we didn't help you? Because see, they were thinking about the person of Jesus, and Jesus saying, don't you realize that you show that you are a part of me when you look out at humanity and you treat them the way I have treated them? When you look at the world with the eyes that I look out at the world, your love for me is going to be seen in the way in which I live out my faith before others. That's what God considers to be true, right? Commendable. And so the test is really about how am I living out my life before others. It's not about how many Bible verses you memorized. It's not about how many days of devotion I had in a row. It's going to say all of those things. They are important. I mean, I commit myself to this because I do think it's important. I want to begin my day every day with my first thoughts turning heavenward, because I know if God has my heart and God has my mind, then my body is going to follow, and my body then will engage in work that God will say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And on those days when I have that level of conviction and I don't really act on it, as long as I have breath, there's opportunity to repent and get it right the next time. Because again, my relationship with God isn't based on perfection. It's based on a relationship of love whereby I am demonstrating the overarching tenor of my life is one to not only know him and make him known, but also to love my neighbor as myself. And I realize that that's a difficult road sometimes, because we all know, hey, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we realize we could be kind of grouchy, right? We cannot be the best people sometimes. And if that happens with us, come on, the people around us, it's going to be the same way. And so how do we keep our eyes on him and run with endurance this race of faith? See, at the end of the day, faith in a God who sees, faith in a God who rewards is going to be the ultimate motivator, so that every day you realize that there is not a place that I can hide, that God does not see me, that all my ways are open before him, and I will give an account. It's not to put us into a space of fear, because God is saying, listen, I am quick to forgive. I am slow to speak, slow to anger. I want you to get this right. This game is not rigged against you. In fact, I'm for you. And now you begin to realize how this life then really matters. Every day is an opportunity for us to go out and let this light shine. So see, when you, going back now, if we would, right, to chapter 11, when you read here in verse 6, without faith, it's impossible to please him. Because my actions now are a demonstration that I am serving God's highest purposes, and that I am aware not only that he exists, but also that one day I'm going to stand before him and give an account. He is one, as it says here, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And my earnestly seeking after God is going to be seen, as we saw in Matthew 25, in the way in which I treat my neighbor. Like when I love them, Jesus says, you're actually loving me. And I see that. And I will reward you for that. Because it demonstrates to me that your heart is after me. This is what this chapter 11 in Hebrews is all about. And I think, as we go through that this week, we're going to see it, because we're going to get a couple of other examples as we finish out our week. So, my friends, I want you to think about that one lesson that we just really, kind of honed in on today, that faith is demonstrated, right? It puts into visibility the condition of one's heart. That's why, think about what Jesus said when he said, you're the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good work and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So all of the praises are just for me. I get an opportunity to say that what drives me each and every day is my knowledge of Jesus and my confidence that one day I will enter into this kingdom because of what Jesus has done for me. And my love for him then just spills over. Again, not perfect, but we're chasing after it. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining me on this Tuesday, August 12th. I pray that you would seize this day and that you would never forget that we serve a God who is good all the time. God bless you. Looking forward to the rest of the week.